All right, here to break down everything happening at our U.S. southern border. We can't turn to anybody better because we've reached out to a bunch of people and they don't hit us back. Only this person hits us back. And we're going to get into that in a
What
second.
are you doing right there?
No, I'm going to get into it in a second.
Because makes her sound like she's second or third on. Come on.
No, will you shut up?
We go to her and that's it.
Will you shut up? No, I've reached out to other people and they don't want to come on the program to talk about the border. She's the one that always comes on and she's always willing to help. And that is fantastic immigration reporter over at the El Paso Times, Lauren Villagran. Lauren, Mike, and Nick, sorry for the intro, but thank you for coming on the program again.
Thanks. I'd love to know who was number 1, 2, 3, and 4.
Oh, that's my point. I don't know why I'm pointing this way because she appears on my right.
I'm going to get into this
because
what you just did. A few of them are in your article. Representative Veronica Escobar has not reached back out. The mayor of El Paso gave us. I've never heard of you before in my life, and so I wanted to bring that up on the show because you're there. You're interviewing these folks. I want to get into that in just a second, but. In all seriousness, Lauren, you know we love your reporting and we love some of the work you've been doing. A few weeks back, I reached out to you because there was this article about, Texas Governor Greg Abbott taking the buoys from the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle video game in Super Nintendo and throwing them out there in the middle of a river to block people. And I said, wow, what is going on? I reached out to you and I said, I would love to have you on the program to kind of explain all of this. And now the recent lawsuit, what he's been saying in the court of public opinion about the Department of Justice and the Biden administration. Can you take our audience a little bit inside everything that happened over the last few weeks? We've had a little bit of news that's on our mind nationwide that has gotten a little bit more coverage. So take us through what happened a few weeks back with all of this and where is it all netting out right now?
Yeah, well, we should remember that Governor Greg Abbott in Texas is not the first person to do this. He's not the first governor. We've seen other governors try to erect different types of border obstacles, border barriers. We saw last year, then Governor Ducey in Arizona put together that string of train cargo boxes. Ultimately, the Biden administration sued Ducey, and those cargo containers had to be removed. So, of course, it's nothing new for elected officials or politicians generally to use the border for any number of reasons. Here in El Paso, we had not seen much from the governor until late December, when y'all will remember El Paso was experiencing a large influx of asylum seekers at our border. You probably remember those pictures of people, families waiting in line, south of the border wall, covered in blankets. It was a pretty dramatic time. The city was working really hard to take care of everybody who was released by Border Patrol, found to have at least some kind of legitimate claim. And then in January, I don't know that it was because there's some debate about the timing of Governor Abbott's intervention here in El Paso. The city, in any case, declares a state of emergency. And a few short weeks later, Governor Abbott sends the Texas National Guard into El Paso. And we start seeing the beginning of, I'm getting to your question, the beginning of this, these additional border barriers, right? So in El Paso, it has been concertina wire, razor wire that is unfolded in reams. It's stacked 6 feet high in the riverbed of the Rio Grande. All those photos where you saw people waiting to seek asylum, that whole area, the whole river canal is filled with this concertina wire. Then we see in recent weeks, things escalate again with the concertina wire being placed in at the border, at the Texas border between Eagle Pass and Piedras Negras. These are two pretty small towns. Okay, Piedras Negras, I think, is a little bigger than Eagle Pass. They have this amazing park that's like this beautiful green space, kind of in the shadow of the International Bridge, right at the riverbank on the Eagle Pass side. And there's also, I think, a little park on the Piedras Negras side. But it's just this place where you really see the seam of the US and Mexico. And the river is beautiful there. Here in El Paso, it's channelized to be an irrigation canal. But there it's like this natural flowing river. It's very green. Um, it's beautiful. And we know that it is also beautiful. So much so that a retired teacher in Eagle Pass had started like an outfitter to take people on river rides. Okay. So this is not a place that's awful and militarized. It was a place that, um, where, I don't know, borderlanders live their daily lives and people cross the border. There is, of course, also undocumented immigration. So in recent weeks, we have seen, as everyone I'm sure has seen the news stories, Governor Abbott decides to deploy a different kind of barrier. And if I can get into the reason for this, y'all probably know that the US Mexico borderline is actually the middle of the river. Once somebody's on the other side, on the north side of the river, they technically, under US law, have the right to claim asylum. So I'm guessing that that was part of the thinking on the part of the governor's administration, that if we put a barrier literally in the middle of the river, that somehow people won't be able to cross or it'll make it more dangerous. And that's what we've seen. It has made it more dangerous. Now, has it stopped anybody from crossing? I don't think so. I think probably even more dangerous are these reams of concertina wire laid in the bed of the river. I'll stop there. It's a lot.
No, it's it's I think whenever we have this conversation about the border, Lauren, I mean, I think there seems to be two schools of thought. One side is that there's a humanitarian crisis here in the sense of the treatment of people trying to have an opportunity at something better. And then on the other side is what is viewed as a security threat. Like, the other side of this. All that being said, though, there's data coming in, including a recent piece that you wrote, that the percentage of people coming in, just the numbers of people enter the United States has dropped noticeably to the tune of about 70%. Aside from some of the examples you just gave, are there some other factors that are playing a role? Because this seems to be I don't know, necessarily a victory for the Biden administration, but something seems to be happening at the border that is causing a reduction and a shift in terms of immigration. What do you attribute all that to?
Yeah. So, we have seen the numbers started to tick up a little bit again, but going back to the wake of the end of Title 42, I think that might have been around the last time that we talked. Everyone who wasn't on the border was expecting a massive rush. And that's not what happened, in part because the funny thing about Title 42 was always that it was like a revolving door. You could cross the border in between ports of entry, which is an unlawful crossing, although it is lawful to ask for asylum once you've done so. Um, but under Title 42, you could be very quickly returned, and there was no consequence at all if you were found to have crossed the border illegally and you didn't have any kind of asylum claim. Well, a couple of things happened. When Title 42 ended, the Biden administration first added a punishment to that. So we go back to the old Title 8 system, where if you cross the border unlawfully and you are found to not have a claim and you are returned, you end up with like a 5-year ban, sometimes longer than that. And you have that crossing on your record. So if you cross a second time, it can be considered a felony and you can be prosecuted. We know that the Obama and Trump administrations did a massive number of prosecutions of migrants, and that was like another era. All right. So there's that. So there's the punishment. So that's one part. The second part, Nick, is that the Biden administration opened up what it likes to call lawful pathways. Okay, so these are additional ways to reach the border, to cross the US border without crossing in between ports of entry. So one of those ways is through the CBP One cell phone app. It's like an app on your cell phone, and you get into it and you can make a claim, you can make a request, and then show up at the bridge at an appointed time. Now, just because you get the appointment, it doesn't mean you get asylum. It doesn't mean you get a chance to enter the United States, beyond showing up at the border and being afforded an opportunity to say, this is who I am. This is what, this is the relief that I think I'm eligible for. People are being held. If they are found to not be eligible, they are being removed under expedited removal. Again, it comes with that punishment. Every other day or every 2 days, there are planes leaving El Paso filled with hundreds of migrants from Guatemala, from Haiti, from other countries, who are being returned. So things have changed dramatically. You use the word victory. I think it's very hard for anyone in government to declare victory on matters of immigration, which are ever changing and super dynamic. But have the numbers drop to a manageable level, at least here in El Paso? The answer is yes.
Lauren, I love when people come on this show and they feel like they're talking too much. And it's like, it's a podcast, one. And two, you're the subject matter expert. This is why we have you on, because you've been saying some things there. I want to give a little bit more space to it, because I had written out a question for you about Governor Abbott. And sometimes, I live in the state of Florida. So sometimes it could be people that listen to the show or watch the show could say, you guys are too hard on the red state governors, right? Because of certain policy or things like that. Nick, don't make a face. Sometimes maybe we are. But let's ask somebody that's covering a governor right now that's fighting up against the Biden administration. I want to give you a little bit more space to what you said before about, the lawsuit that the Biden administration filed against Governor Abbott. We've seen, some of people would call the political theater around the busing of migrants to different parts of DC, Delaware, and stuff like that. What is it about Governor Abbott's obsession with getting back at the Biden administration? Is he justified with some of this stuff? Can you just take us through the relationship and how it's escalated with this recent action with the stuff with the buoys?
Yeah, it's a hard question to answer, Mike, because I don't want to speculate about the governor's true intentions. His stated intention with Operation Lone Star is to secure the border. Now, what that means and what it really truly looks like, I think is like a moving target, right? What does a secure border mean? I mean, I know that this is something that Border Patrol has wrestled with. Like, how do you gauge the efficacy of what Border Patrol does? They like to say that they're like aiming for operational control of the border. We have a more than 2,000-mile border. It is so big. It is so vast. And what's incredible is that we have a friendly neighbor. I mean, I sometimes watch the news out of Europe and look at the conflict between Russia and Ukraine and think, I wonder why politicians in the United States think that it's okay to be provocative around Mexico or talk about a potential invasion of Mexico. And we know that some of that language has been thrown around, when what we truly have is a partner and a friend in Mexico. Yes, a sovereign nation that does not always see things the way that we do. But we have this exceptionally long border. And the steps that Abbott has taken, remember, Texas has the biggest chunk of that 2,000-mile border. We have more than 1,000 miles in Texas of shared border with Mexico. Is not made it harder to reach that border, but it's made it more dangerous to take those last steps. We do know that risk and danger are rarely they rarely factor into people's decisions about whether or not to make the final leap. So how can I explain this? Y'all, I was out on the New Mexico border just a few weeks ago. And in the El Paso region, that is where we are seeing the most deaths that we have seen in 20 years, I think, if possibly ever. The temperature here is feeling like Arizona right now. It was 112 degrees yesterday. At the New Mexico border, the border wall is 30 feet high in much of it. There's still a little piece of 18-foot border. And we went out with the Sunland Park Fire Department. These are not Border Patrol guys, but they do work. They work in a community at the border. And I saw these rope ladders, like these makeshift rope ladders hanging off this 30-foot border wall. Do you know how dangerous it is to fall from 30 feet high onto hard packed sand, or to even walk the mile through the desert that will get you to Highway 9 or a road where someone will pick you up in, 80 degrees, let alone 100 degrees? I spoke to the medical examiner in New Mexico who told me that one of the bodies that they reviewed was on sand that was 150 degrees. So I can't stress enough that the issue of undocumented immigration or unlawful immigration or asylum seekers, depending on who you're talking to and which population you want to look at. Um, I can't stress enough that simply building taller obstacles, placing floating obstacles, sharpening the wire, sharpening the wall, anything that you could do, you can run the gamut of like medieval things at the border, and people are still going to take that last step. So I think it's interesting if we could move like the national debate around ways that improve people's lives, or clearly the Biden administration's approach to lawful pathways, there is criticism to be had of that approach, and I can enumerate some of that here. But when you open other doors, safer doors, and you create a mechanism that allows people to make their claim safely, they will choose that. And that's why we've seen the numbers drop. There are still people showing up at the border, but they're getting in a different line, if that makes sense, when before there was no line. And so why are we seeing people crossing at the Eagle Pass area? It's because for whatever reason in that area, or for the particular nationalities that are crossing there, the app isn't working, or they're unable to access those doors that have been opened in other parts of the border. It's just not a perfect system. But I don't know if y'all saw the images shot by my colleague, Omar Ornelas, and other colleagues from Texas within Gannett, of migrants like passing their children over the razor wire to safety. My colleague Rick Jervis went and interviewed folks, and to see the photos of children with like these lacerations on their body, stapled together at a hospital in Eagle Pass because the ER was too busy to sew them up. It's really dramatic and alarming, and will show what people are willing to do when, you have to really think, what did they think their alternative was that drove them to do this? I don't know. I don't remember what your question was, Mike. It's so dramatic. I go down the rabbit hole.
No, it's okay. It was really, again, about Governor Abbott and this relationship that we see as a public perception, that it's very contentious, and the two of them, there's no solutions. And you were talking about how he is treating Texas with this sovereignty, right? This is my home, and we operate most of the border, and so we're going to do things our way. But as everyone knows, there could be a violation of those buoys based on a federal law, right? So yeah, sure, you own Texas, but the rest of us here, I've got to oversee the whole country. So is the relationship what is being perceived, or do you feel like Governor Abbott's really doing the best, for Texans out there in terms of securing the border?
Well, let's go back to why we even know about what's going on in Eagle Pass and why it's become a national story. The Houston Chronicle broke the story about two Texas Department of Public Safety officers who had a crisis of conscience, who spoke out and said, we want to secure the border, but not at the cost of being inhumane to children and families. That's where all of this came from. That's why we know about what's happening, was because, obviously the imagery of the buoys, but this became a national story in part because these two Texas DPS officers spoke out. Now, Texas DPS is not filled with left-leaning Democrats, okay? These are officers who are, sworn to serve and protect, and who serve the governor, who have been engaged in the border, in border enforcement through Operation Lone Star for a couple of years now. So for two officers to speak out, I think, was telling. The second part of your question had to do with where these buoys are in the lawsuit. the Biden administration waited a long time because I was writing back in January, as I mentioned, about the concertina wire laid in the river channel. So the International Boundary and Water Commission, which doesn't ever have the limelight, nor does it ever want the limelight, it's this very bureaucratic international organization that's made up of the US and Mexico. And it was the organization that was created when the actual borderline was drawn. And it's the organization that typically resolves disputes. And I'll give you like an example that's actually not that far off. In the 1960s, the Rio Grande River changed course in the El Paso Juarez area. And there was like I'm sorry, it was before the 1960s. It was a few decades earlier. No, it was 100 years earlier, now that I'm remembering. And it took 100 years to resolve a dispute about where the border really was in between El Paso and Juarez. And so this international organization is very careful, both sides of it, the Mexican and the US side, of making sure that the water runs smoothly, that the borderline doesn't change, and anything that gets in the river that could change the river channel is a big deal. And so Mexico has filed a complaint, as y'all probably know, when those buoys were laid, saying that this is on the borderline. Part of this belongs to Mexico, and anything that interferes with that river water could theoretically change the US-Mexico border. And so it is a big deal. And we saw the Department of Justice get involved. The Biden administration has not, as far as I know, spoken out against Governor Abbott very specifically. They seem to be preferring to speak through the Justice Department. I think there's nothing more that Governor Abbott might like from a political perspective than to pick a fight with the President of the United States. But we're heading into an election year. It's going to be a long season. Mike, we know your governor has taken several pages out of the Abbott playbook. So yeah, I just think we're going to probably see more of this, not less. We saw to wind up here, Governor Abbott's reaction to the filing of that lawsuit was essentially, bring it on. I mean, I think he specifically said, we'll see you in court.
Quick break from our pod to tell you about a new pod at Fresh Roasted Coffee, Envy Pods. So if you go to freshroastedcoffee.com, my partner's shaking his head. That's a good transition. What are you kidding me?
It was good. No, I shook my head. I was like, that's brilliant.
Thank you.
Because I saw this picture earlier. I was like, I saw what you're doing.
It is pretty good. That's right. So listen, the new Envy Pods over at freshroastedcoffee.com, the official sponsor of Can We Please Talk, environmentally safe, compostable. You can go check these out at freshroastedcoffee.com. When you open up the package, it smells delicious. I'm telling you, you can't smell it on here, but I promise you that when I opened this morning to make my cup of coffee, it was delicious. Head to freshroastedcoffee.com today. Use the promo code CANWEGET20 for 20% off your first order, or hit the link in our show details.
On the subject of politics, right now we're seeing Republicans obviously in charge of the House, or having House majority, continuing to pursue Secretary of Homeland Security Alejandro Mayorkas. Where, from just a political standpoint, legal standpoint, just from your reporting, it seems like this is a matter of Republicans wanting to blame the Secretary of Homeland Security for what's going on at the border, despite numbers, as we talked a moment ago, continuing to reduce. Is this really a case of political grandstanding, or in your estimation, when you observe the work and the tenure of the current Secretary of Homeland Security, are there reasons to be concerned about his actions? And is there any merit really to Republicans, or what Republicans are pursuing in the House?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure that I'm qualified to say whether, I haven't reviewed whatever evidence they might have. What I can say is that, as far as what I understand about the way the US government works, I mean, impeachment, there has to be wrongdoing. It can't be that you don't like the policies. I don't recall, and correct me if I'm wrong, another DHS secretary being targeted even when policies were quote unquote not working. So let's say, the number of migrants arriving at the southwest border is increasing, or I don't know that that's grounds for impeachment. Regardless, it's all beside the point that we all know to be true, which is that Congress is the body that is supposed to act on immigration. And anytime the executive, whether Democrat or Republican, makes all of the immigration policy, it's going to be all from the point of view of that executive. It's never going to be comprehensive because there's only a certain number of levers that the executive can pull, versus Congress acting to overhaul our work visa system. I don't know if y'all caught, I did a story a couple of months ago now about a small Texas town that's 100 miles north of the border. It's called Alpine. It's a sweet little town. It's near Marfa. Y'all may have heard of Marfa. And we spoke almost exclusively to Republicans. Okay, we're talking about ranchers, restaurant owners. It's a funky little town, but it's fairly conservative, and definitely votes Republican. And to a person, what I heard was that there was a massive labor shortage. The labor shortage that we see at the national level is really playing out in rural communities in, like exacerbated ways. Like, we visited with a woman who owned a big restaurant and a hotel and was opening up another hotel. And she was bussing tables. She was delivering food in her restaurant that she owns, one of the biggest in town, because she just couldn't find workers. And we know that 100 miles south, folks are literally banging down the door looking for work. Now, the executive really can't do anything about that. The laws are the laws. You can't come to the US border and say, hey, I'd like a work visa. That's not a thing. It's not a thing. Could it be a thing? It could, but that would require Congress to act. And so this community was clamoring, calling their congressman, Republican Tony Gonzalez. Tony Gonzalez, in fact, a few weeks later, he had been working for several months on some legislation that would increase the accessibility of work visas. Same with Democrat Veronica Escobar. I mean, there are ideas on both sides of the aisle. If we continue to let the executive branch handle it all, I think we're going to expect more. We should expect more of the same. We should expect Republicans to hate whatever Democrats come up with, and for Democrats to hate whatever Republicans come up with. It's in the halls of Congress that compromise is supposed to be hammered out. So that's what I'll say about that.
No, I mean, that's seriously very well said. And I think producer Tim knows which clip to use for social media. Lauren, before we let you go, I did want to give you some space here because as our show has grown exponentially in audience size, some people may have not heard you the previous times you've been on this program. And some of the great work that you do, you can go check out her work over at the El Paso Times. But some of the articles that you've written, some of these personal stories, you covered the fire in Juarez at that detention center, and you told us some stories of people that have fallen from some of these heights, trying to climb these walls just to secure a spot here in this country and flee the countries that or have so much oppression and so much violence, whatever it is that they're trying to get away from, to come here. I would love to give you some space right now to talk about some of these articles, some of these things you've covered. How does it feel for you, for the people listening right now? You live in the border town of El Paso. You're covering this stuff all the time. Take us through like your emotions in covering this, some stories that have really just kind of left a mark on you that you want to leave a mark with our audience.
Wow, that's a big question. I've been covering the border off and on for 20 years, and the US-Mexico relationship and relationships in the region for about as long. And, it's not easy. What I can say is that the rhetoric and the heated language that we all hear on the national political stage, or in Austin, or in Tallahassee, or in any number of state capitals, including, also in Washington, D.C., is that it often feels very far removed from the experience here on the border. it's hard, Mike, because you're asking me this just a few days after our August 3rd, the anniversary of the August 3rd, 2019 massacre at an El Paso Walmart, when you had a young white man from a Dallas suburb drive 10 hours to El Paso wanting to kill people of color, Hispanics, Mexicans, and ultimately killed 23 people, some of whom were Mexican. And this is a place that celebrates its binational culture, its binational heritage. And I can tell you, as someone who moved here, I didn't grow up here. You know, I'm originally from Boston. My family's from New York. I come from an Italian immigrant background, and I'm very proud of that. And yet I found an amazing place here that is so incredibly welcoming and sees so much richness in the kind of cultural melting pot. And that's even with all of the kind of quote unquote trouble, if you will. Like it's hard to live in a militarized zone, and El Pasoans have direct contact with the people who are migrating here. And people often see themselves, because they aren't far removed from their own immigration story. I think sometimes in other parts of the United States, people are maybe farther removed from their immigration story. But if you aren't Native American here, you've got an immigration story somewhere back there in the, in the closet, in the files, in the ancestry.com account. And so folks are on a journey here. And yes, I get all of the press releases. I see all of the good work that Border Patrol and U.S. Customs and Border Protection does to protect this country from bad actors. There are folks who have criminal records who are trying to come into the country. The vast majority do not. And so, this work isn't easy. It does require a balance. Not everyone who comes here with an asylum claim has a legitimate asylum claim. Not everyone who comes here is a criminal. What I can tell you is that almost every single person that I talk to has a story of hoping for a better life and seeing possibility in the United States. And I think that's really cool. Like, I think that it's really inspiring to talk to so many people who just see possibility here, and hope for a better life. And so, I think we have to keep our eyes open and our ears open and really, really listen to people in order to find ways so that immigration is orderly. Does anybody want families crossing a river, swimming across a dangerous river, climbing a 30-foot wall to get here? I mean, I would hope that both Republicans and Democrats could agree that we don't want to see families put in excessive danger. So yeah, it's kind of time to call the congressman or woman and ask for a debate, a real debate that could see the issues around immigration not be border issues. They don't need to be border issues. It can be a different kind of system.
Very well said. This is why we have you on the program. She's a friend of the pod, Lauren Villagran. You can check out all of her amazing work over at the El Paso Times. Go subscribe to the El Paso Times, support local journalism. Nick is nodding his head. The two of us do that. Check out all of Lauren's great work. Lauren, I can't thank you enough for coming on the program. Always, at any beckoning and call, Twitter, DM, text message, you are the best. Truly, continued success to you. Please stay safe.
Thank you.
Hey, thanks for watching the Can We Please Talk podcast. Whatever clip you just watched, we hope you enjoyed it, and we hope you stick around for some more. Subscribe to the channel. My partner's over here smashing the button. Come on, do him a favor. So hit subscribe.